Alright guys, I watched Snow White, so you don't have to. Let's get into it and let's talk about this film. Of course, there's been a lot of lead up to this film. We've made many a video talking about Snow White and Rachel Zegler and all the politics surrounding this new Disney live action. And I put live action in air quotes because I'm like, can we even call this movie live action? And I'll tell you why in just a moment. Before we get into the actual synopsis of the film, and I'll give you a little summary, spoiler alert, if you have not watched this film and you plan to, you're gonna get hella spoilers in this video. But before we get there, let's talk about the lead up and refresh our minds as to what was going on with this film before its 2025 release. Of course, Rachel Zegler went wickedly viral after talking about Snow White and really looking down upon the original 1937 version of the film. And she said this when being interviewed.
No longer 1937.
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. So we didn't do that this time. I was scared of the original cartoon. I think I watched it once and then I never picked it up again. I watched it for the first time in probably 16, 17 years. The cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power. No longer.
Okay, so we could have used a little bit of PR training, but knowing Disney, maybe that was her PR training. Maybe she was told to go out there and shit on the 1937 version before releasing this new version. But you know what? Rachel Zegler may have told a joke, but she did not tell a lie, because they absolutely did run in the direction of creating a new feminist utopian landscape in this 2025 Snow White. But of course, there's more with Rachel Zegler. Here's a video of her talking about how much she deserves to be paid for standing in a princess dress for 18 hours.
If I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online. If I'm going to stand there 18 hours in a dress of an iconic Disney princess, I deserve to be paid for every hour that it is streamed online.
Okay, and there's nothing like inherently wrong with what she's saying, it's just the attitude. It's not giving Disney princess. And Disney used to do this thing where if they cast somebody in a role, they took it really seriously and made sure that while they were out there on the PR tour and while they were out there doing press, they sort of maintained that Disney-like, princess-like, demure, cutesy vibe about them. And Rachel Zegler completely abandoned that. And of course, we'll all remember when she went online and posted essentially a big you to anybody who supported Donald Trump, and then she took those posts down and ended up apologizing to the public for even posting it in the first place. But we all know how she feels about 50% of the population here in the United States. Again, it's not giving princess. And it's certainly not giving somebody who could rule over a utopian society where everybody gets along, because you seem to hate 50% of the society you're living in right now. But I digress. Now let's get into the story. I've taken lots of notes, so I'm going to refer to them as I go through what I witnessed in watching this new Snow White film. Now, first things first, Snow White gets her name not from the fairness of her skin, as we obviously know. Rachel Zegler would be a miscast in that sense if we were gonna go with that bit of dialogue. Instead, she gets her name from surviving a snowstorm. Here's a short little clip. I don't want to get copyright claimed though, so let's see if we can.
My father told me long ago, I braved a bitter storm of snow.
There it is. Just to prove that it's real, okay? She braved a bitter storm of snow, and things went a little uphill from there as her father and mother are king and queen to a utopian communist society. I'm not joking, guys. Now, they sort of communicate this in a very childlike way. They say things like, we will always keep in mind that what's mine is always yours. Those who tend to the land own its bounty. These are a few of the little lyrics and tidbits that are sprinkled throughout the intro to this movie. And visually, you're seeing a whole lot of farmers and people who are producing things on the land, and Snow White and the king and queen are essentially telling these people, because you tend to the land, you are owed the things that you produce, and everybody shares and is mindful of what each person is getting, and we spread our resources evenly, which is where this idea of fairness, as Snow White is the fairest of them all, is really presented in the film. When they're talking about Snow White being the fairest of them all, this is not in any way an inference to her beauty or the fairness of her skin or anything like that, as we might have seen in the 1937 version, mixed in with the kindness and demureness of that 1937 Snow White. Snow White is the fairest of them all because she has these communist sensibilities to share all resources with the farmers that till the land, and she got those sensibilities from her mother and her father. Now, unfortunately, her mother dies, okay, of illness, and then her father remarries an evil queen. And inside the Snow White, I guess, struggle internally that she's dealing with in this movie, she's wondering whether or not she can really rise to the occasion and become the leader that she was apparently born to be. As Rachel Zegler says in the PR, this is not about her being saved by a prince. It's about her becoming the leader that she always knew she could be and that her father taught her that she could be. So here are some lyrics. So will she rise or bow her head? Will she lead or just be led? Is she the girl she always said she'd be? Someone no one needs to save. So these are ideas that are constantly floating around throughout the film. Now, her father dies, of course, and the evil queen takes over. And what the evil queen does, you listen to this and you tell me what it sounds like. She makes up a fictitious villain to the south of their southernmost land. Okay, so beyond their southern border, there's an evil villain that this evil queen conjures up and tells the people about. And she makes the farmers into soldiers. Then she steals all the land's resources and hoards them to herself. Now, I'm inclined to believe that the queen making up a villain to the south of their southern border was sort of a little nod to Donald Trump. So I guess Gal Gadot is partially Donald Trump in this film. And of course, as I said, she takes all the resources and hoards them for herself, and she doesn't share, and she isn't kind, and she doesn't care about fairness, which ironically is what communism has always been in practice, okay? So Gal Gadot is doing communism as it is in reality, and Snow White has these utopian communist sensibilities that if she could only get in power and do it right, she will do it right, and she will share all the resources evenly, and we will have equity. Love that word. Okay, it's gonna pop up again as well. Let me go back to my notes here. So, we are wondering, where's the love interest? Okay, Rachel Zegler says the Prince Charming in the 1937 film is a stalker. He's just a prince that sees Snow White, hears her singing, becomes obsessed with her, and he's like, where's this girl who has this beautiful voice? And I can't find her. And he stalks her and stalks her and stalks her. And then they have this non-consensual kiss that, of course, wakes Snow White out of her coma in the 1937 version. No prince in 2025. Instead, Snow White is one day, I guess, in the kitchen of their castle, and she sees a man. This, handsome young white man who's stealing potatoes from the kitchen. And this man is a bandit. He's a bandit revolutionary who is stealing potatoes because he feels he has owed them because the evil queen is hoarding all the resources. Okay, somewhat reasonable. And Snow White's like, yo, why are you stealing? Do you think that's a good thing to do? And he's like, yeah, I gotta do what I gotta do. Times are tough. This is my way of sticking it to the evil queen. And Snow White's like, okay, word, kind of. I kind of understand that. And then he gets arrested, okay? He's arrested by the evil queen. The evil queen is like, take off his clothes and take off his shoes and go tie him to the outside of this castle where he is just going to freeze away in the storm. And Snow White says, no. I love this revolutionary. No, she doesn't love him at this moment because a feminist could never love a man so quickly. She goes and she releases this man from his arrest and tells him to go, and go he does. And later on in the film, the magic mirror is asked yet again by the evil queen, who's the fairest of them all? And the magic mirror goes, not you, girl. It's actually Snow White. So the evil queen is like, I gotta get this girl. I'm gonna put a hit out on Snow White. I tell a huntsman to go find Snow White as she's out there picking apples, and I need him to kill her. The huntsman's like, you sure? And she says, I'm sure. He says, word. He goes out to go kill Snow White, and then he just can't bring himself to do it. He knows Snow White's a good person. He doesn't really love this evil queen. So he tells Snow White, run into the woods. You have to get out of here. She put a hit out on you, and she's gonna kill you. And he also goes, by the way, she lied about your father. Snow White's like, what? She lied about my father. I'm running into the woods. She runs into the woods. And, as it happens in Snow White fashion, she finds the home of the 7 dwarves. She decides to take a little nap. She is woken up by the 7 dwarves, which in this movie are now 7 CGI dwarves. And when I tell you The animation in this film is like the same animation they must have used for Polar Express. That's what they look like. So we go through this whole CGI moment where I imagine Rachel Zegler is just acting with, I don't know, tennis balls on sticks that represent the seven dwarves, and it really does feel like that. And she teaches the seven dwarves to clean their house and keep everything tidy, and then she realizes, you know what, that huntsman told me something was going on with my father. She lied about my father. Maybe my father's out there. I know that there's bandit revolutionaries that live in the woods. I'm gonna go find those bandits. And she goes out into the woods and she meets her love interest once again. And of course, her Prince Charming, as I said, is not a prince. He's just this revolutionary. And you know how they fall in love and how they start to spark up a little bit of charming chemistry? He belittles her, demeans her, and reminds her that she has a ton of privilege by singing a song to her about her princess problems. So he essentially says, you don't know what the real world is like. You've been living in a castle. You've had this cute, privileged life. I know what the real world's like as a revolutionary who's working to battle this evil queen. And Snow White's like, ooh, okay. I love that. I love when a man belittles me. Okay. So then the evil queen realizes Snow White's still alive. She sends out a little mini army to go kill Snow White once again, and the army stumbles upon her with these bandit revolutionaries, and her love interest says, run. There's nothing you can do here. I'm gonna fight this fight. You need to go, and you need to hide. And of course, Snow White is a feminist girl boss who does not listen, and the revolutionary bandits find themselves in a state of not being able to defend themselves. And Snow White runs in on a horse that she's managed to get on top of and ride, and she saves all of these revolutionaries. So when Rachel Zegler says the prince is not going to save her, she's going to save herself, there's an instance where we get that. But no, it does switch for just a moment. There was one lone soldier left behind who was just about to shoot Snow White with an arrow when her revolutionary love interest flings himself in front of her and takes the arrow. And he recovers in like 0.2 seconds in this film. It is actually absolutely remarkable because the seven dwarves, and particularly the dwarf Doc, ends up saving him and taking the arrow out. Now, his name is Jonathan, by the way, this revolutionary. Jonathan and Snow White end up singing this love poppy ballad. And this is where we get our question answered about what happens with the non-consensual kiss that takes place in the 1937 version of this film. We get the lyric, promise to wake me with a kiss, and they both sing it to each other. So this is consent. Now he can kiss her at the end of the film and wake her up. Because remember that time that we sang about promising each other that we would wake each other with a kiss if ever the time or opportunity came for such a thing to happen? So anyways, they sing this song. Of course, the evil queen turns herself into an old woman and tricks Snow White into biting into a poison apple. Snow White goes into the coma. She's laying there. The prince revolutionary ends up getting captured by the queen and imprisoned, but he escapes in just enough time to make it to Snow White to give her this now consensual kiss and wake her up from her coma. And of course, we're wondering, how does this movie end? How does Snow White actually end up overthrowing the evil queen? Well, Snow White and her team of revolutionary bandits go right back up to the castle with all the people around, and the queen says, kill her! She is wanting to overthrow me. She is the fairest of them all. I'm jelly. We gotta get rid of her. And Snow White goes, wait! And the way that she overthrows the queen is when the soldiers are about to kill her, she starts remembering their names. And she's like, yo, I remember you. Didn't you used to be a farmer before evil queen made you soldier? And you used to have a cherry farm. And you made cherries with your wife, and you would take the cherries and share them with everybody in the town. Because again, we used to live in a communist utopia. And the guy's like, word. I suddenly remembered that I did used to farm cherries and share them with everybody in town. And the soldiers lay down their arms and say that they will no longer fight for the evil queen. And then the evil queen is overthrown, not because anybody commits a violent act against her, but she actually goes to her mirror again to like go through this tussle of who's the fairest of them all. And the mirror's like, yo, I told you about 10 times now, the fairest of them all is Snow White. And she's still the fairest of them all. Because while you may be beautiful, Gal Gadot, you know, Rachel Zegler is beautiful in her heart. So Gal Gadot smashes the mirror and the mirror kills her. How? I don't know. I don't understand the magic that the mirror has that is somehow tied to the life of Gal Gadot, but that's what happens. And she dies. And then all the town's women and men and children cheer for Snow White. Rachel Zegler is now the leader, and she can be with her revolutionary leftist husband, Jonathan, and turn the town back into a communist utopia. That's the synopsis. Guys, I'm not joking. That is literally what happened. And we can't say we weren't warned, because Rachel Zegler did tell us that it was going to be exactly this, and it ended up being exactly that. Now, I don't want to just shit on this movie. In honesty, it wasn't the worst thing to watch. You know, it kept its pace. It wasn't good, but it wasn't horrific. I think a lot of people might be being a little dramatic when they're talking about how bad this film is. It's certainly, I don't think it's worth watching. Then I guess it is that bad. I wouldn't go out of my way to watch this film unless you're really curious about how the 1937 Snow White is going to be reimagined in our 2025 hellscape. That would be the only reason I watch this. The good parts of this film, funnily enough, are the dwarves. I found myself being at my most entertained, feeling the most like fun from this film when the dwarves were on screen. It's so sad that they're not actual human beings. And there's this sort of thing that you have to do in your brain when you're watching this film. You have to look at the dwarves and see what they're doing and the choreography and the singing, and you have to imagine what it would be like if they were actual people. And if they were actual people, the dwarf scenes would have been spectacular. And it's too bad that we were robbed of that because they didn't want to hire little people because they thought it was going to be offensive. And maybe that was informed a little bit by Peter Dinklage's comments on having little people in films, and these 7 dwarves being a sort of offensive caricature of little people. But of course, we've seen little people actors saying, I would love to be in this film. I'm an actor with dwarfism, and you could have cast me and 6 others, and I would have been more than happy to take on this role of being a dwarf. So it's an absolute shame that in their CGI-ness, the fakest part of this film is actually the best part of this film. And they should have been real people. The love interest, I'll also say, was pretty all right when it came to acting. He really lit up the screen. His scenes were very vibrant. His acting was very vibrant. And I don't know if that's because he's a really good actor or because all of the acting happening around him was so horrible. And ironically, with those 2 things being the good things that I found in this film, the most interesting parts of this movie were the white men. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles when you're super woke in your messaging. Now, things that did not go well in this film, and so much so that I feel the need to comment on them. Gal Gadot. Ooh. The acting left so much to be desired with her. It felt as though I was watching somebody who had just learned English give their lines. And I even told Taylor, our producer Taylor, that it also felt like porno acting. I just gotta be honest. That's what I saw when I saw Gal Gadot. She looked so uncomfortable in everything that she was doing, so robotic and mechanic in everything that she was doing, and unfortunately it was really showing through in everything she did. Every single line she delivered, the songs that she sang, nothing about it had any sort of natural lean to it whatsoever. Now with Rachel Zegler, I felt like her acting was okay, her singing was okay, but it was not what was needed for this film. We all know she's immensely talented, especially when it comes to singing, and there was not a note out of place in the songs that she was singing. I just felt like whoever made the music for this film did not have the 1937 version of Snow White in mind. And I'll play you this clip of Rachel Zegler singing one of the songs that is the titular song of this film, and it's Waiting on a Wish. And you'll see what she sounds like. She sounds beautiful, but there's something here.
Here's let it echo, 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 echo. Your voice will carry through and bring that dream to you, just like an echo, echo, echo.
Okay, sounds beautiful. But is that what Snow White is supposed to sound like? Now, I'm going to play you a small clip from the 1937 version of Snow White, and you let me know what you hear, okay?
And all because I was afraid. I'm so ashamed of the fuss I've made.
Okay, there you go. You hear that? It's soft, The word demure keeps coming up, but that's literally what I'm thinking of every time I think of the 1937 version of Snow White. Very soft, very feminine, very light, very airy, very wispy. And Rachel Zegler is doing this echo, just like loud, belty, and that's what you get when you turn this very cutesy character into a feminist girl boss. It becomes loud and brash and belty, and while it sounds good for Rachel Zegler to do that, it does not sound like Snow White to me whatsoever. But we've abandoned what Snow White was meant to be, and I find that with a lot of these Disney remakes and live actions and a lot of the princesses that they make these days, and just Disney films in general, there's this sort of poppy, belty loudness that every single female character gets of, I have this dream of being bigger and being a leader and dominating everything, and something's holding me down and making sure that I cannot do it, so I must sing with all my loudness and all my girl bossery to let the world know how powerful I actually am. But what they're forgetting is that the 1937 version of Snow White was extremely powerful, and she managed to be extremely powerful and influence all these men and people around her, whilst also remaining extremely feminine and extremely soft. And we've seen it done well before, so why could we not do it here? And that's what I was looking for in the music. And I guess it's not necessarily Rachel Zegler's fault. I feel as though she could be great in a Disney film. This was just not the Disney film for her. On top of that, the visuals and costuming for this movie left much to be desired, really unremarkable. Nothing really stood out. It felt sort of bleak. It felt uninspired. And I think a lot of that was the fact that Disney was not really paying homage to the 1937. They were reconstructing it. And when they got a significant amount of backlash about everything that they were doing on this set before the movie released, I think they just sort of slapped together as much as they could to keep people from being upset, and they threw the film out. And you get a lot of uninspired visuals here. And most importantly, as I said, this is called live action. But there are several scenes in this movie where I don't think it's too crazy to assume we are watching 100% CGI on screen. Like, not a single actual living thing or being is on the screen during these scenes, yet they have the audacity to call this film live action. So those are some good things and some bad things. The last thing I want to sum up is, of course, the politics of this film, because that was the big question here, with Rachel Zegler going out on the PR tour and saying all this stuff, with Disney having these general notes about constantly influencing people with subliminal leftist messaging and really going in that direction with everything that they've released recently. We figured it was going to be the same for Snow White, and it absolutely is. And we sort of touched on a lot of these points already in our analysis. But number one is that this entire story is an allegory for the effectiveness of communism when it's done right. It's essentially what they're saying. We start off in this utopian society where everybody's sharing and everything is equitable and everything is inclusive and our population is immensely diverse. There's a person from every race, every background, every age that lives in this utopian communist community. And then the evil queen comes and takes all the resources and keeps them to herself, which we know is actual communism, but the writers of this movie are clearly not aware of that. We even get this direct quote about the queen, and one of the dwarves says this in the film, that her greedy economic policies forced them into a liminal space where ethics and motives are ill-defined. And the dwarf says this in reference to the revolutionary bandits, because, of course, any little kid who's watching this movie is going to think, but stealing is bad. And that's what the bandits are doing. They're stealing. And this quote, greedy economic policies force them into a liminal space where ethics and motives are ill-defined, essentially says, as a nod to adults that will be watching this film, that their stealing is okay because they're living under a greedy economic system where all the resources are hoarded. There's also a few other quotes that allude to this utopian communist society throughout the film. They refer to the former kingdom as free and fair when it was under Snow White's mother and father. They say the bounty of the land belonged to all who tended it. They say, in reference to the evil queen, she poisoned everyone to believe it's all for themselves. And then Snow White makes this proposition that if we all just give in to the system will give back to us tenfold by saying, if we all give up our meager scraps, we'll get more than we could have ever imagined. And she says this to the dwarves and the revolutionaries as they're, revving up to go take this kingdom back. Now, alongside the communist themes, there are feminist themes in this film. Snow White is constantly referred to as being born to lead and asked whether or not she can lead and step up to the plate and do what needs to be done. She's referred to as someone who does not need to be saved. When she's teaching the dwarves to clean their house, which in the 1937 version, we get this sort of whistle while you work, where Snow White cleans and bakes for them, and they do the same. And she sort of says, I'm going to stay in your house, but I will help you with all the different dynamics of hygiene and cleanliness and making good food for you. And she takes on that feminine role. Well, in this film, they reimagine Whistle While You Work, and Snow White essentially hands them the cleaning tools and is like, not only am I going to stay in your house, which I trespassed into and slept in one of your beds, but you guys are gonna get up and clean this shit up. And she says, you wash the dishes, you tidy up the room, and he'll use the broom. Of course, also Snow White does not let anybody save her, essentially, except for that he takes that arrow, but she saves them first. So in order for him to even have that moment of being able to save her, she had to come in and save him and the 7 magical diversity revolutionaries that are alongside him. And of course, lastly, on the feminist themes, none of the men in this movie are particularly helpful to Snow White. She is consistently the focal point that is leading the story along, which makes sense, but she's also saving herself and saving everyone else at any given moment. And we see this in Disney movies. We saw it in the live action version of The Little Mermaid. The Little Mermaid essentially ends up saving herself. The prince is only there for what? I don't know, just to have some scenes that reinforce the structure of the girl bossery that we're about to witness. So it becomes a sort of, why am I watching this? And why do these characters matter if they're really not moving the plot forward in any way? And we know that this woman is capable of saving herself at any given moment. And there's just this delusional tendency that modern day feminists have that if a woman is to be saved, it somehow makes her less strong, which is not the case. And the 1937 version of Snow White knew that. They knew how strong Snow White was, even though she needed to be saved by a prince by the end of the film. Now, in this movie, the magic mirror quite literally refers to Snow White as being awakened, aka woke, okay? She is awake. Now, there's also diversity everywhere in this film, but it's almost something you don't notice because the film is so just all over the place and you're so busy focusing on other things that you don't even notice. And typically, I like diversity that, goes unnoticed and feels natural because the film is so good. And this is the opposite of that. And then, lastly, we were all wondering how they were going to get consent for this non-consensual kiss that happens in the 1937 film, and they square that away with the song where the revolutionary and Snow White promise to wake each other up with a kiss, if ever necessary, or if ever given the opportunity. So there you go, guys. I don't know what I woke score this film. It's got to be pretty high considering the whole movie is about teaching kids to be communist and share. So maybe an 8 out of 10? 8 out of 10, the communist themes, the feminist stuff, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's an 8 out of 10 on the woke scale. The movie itself, giving it a grade 4.5. 4.5 out of 10. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but I certainly wouldn't take an hour and a half out of my day to watch this again, or even a first time, which is why I did it for you guys. And hopefully I summed it up well enough to where you can follow everything and you don't have to go and watch this now that you've been filled in. We knew this movie wasn't going to be great. With all the lead up, with all the backlash, with all the controversy, I think even Disney knew it wasn't going to be great, and they pushed it further along. We had a 2024 release that became 2025, and now that it's out, I think they are just happy to wipe their hands of it. I'm seeing a lot of images of empty theaters leading up to a handful of people going to watch this film. And I wonder how it's going to do in the box office. Disney is no stranger to a flop in its modern era, and they put millions of dollars into these movies that end up paying them meagerly in response when they are released. But hey, that just seems to be the way the cookie crumbles. Maybe Disney will wake up and stop trying to influence people with politics in their films, and we'll focus on just making a good film with a good storyline, even if it means the young female protagonist is not a girl boss and is actually feminine and strong. Maybe we could have done that. Maybe we could have looked at the 1937 version of Snow White and thought to ourselves, why was it so successful? And how do we build on that success and make something even better than what we had in 1937? Instead, Disney said no. The 1937 version of this film was successful for the wrong reasons. It's built on old school stereotypes and traditional thinking and gender roles, and we must burn that to the ground. and build upon it a utopian communist society where everybody shares their apples and cherries and potatoes. Guys, those are my thoughts on Snow White. Drop your thoughts in the comments down below if you did get the opportunity to see this film. If you didn't, and you listened to the synopsis, did it end up being what you thought it would be? For me, absolutely. It is exactly what I thought it would be. Uninspired and devoid of meaning. Guys, if you like this video, like, subscribe, click the notification bell to be notified every single time I post a video for you guys. And if you disagree with anything I said in this video, do get out, but do so respectfully. We encourage healthy debate on this channel. And with that, guys, let me know what other movies I should watch so that you don't have to. And I will try to fill you in and give you my take with that. Bye, guys.